question I've had for a while now. What is the best pandemic novel? I suspect it was written prior to 2020, though it could be Patricia Lockwood's Will There Ever Be Another You? But personally, I'm putting all my money on Bennett Sims's A Questionable Shape. Sims is one of my favorite authors. A man who writes about minds, yours, mine, and others. He's a master of paranoia and an explorer of the psychogeography of the brain. A Questionable Shape is his first book. It's a zombie novel published by $2 Radio in 2013. It tells the story of Vermalion, whose friend Mazok's father has gone missing from his home. Vermalion and Mazok assume that he was bitten and reanimated, and is now wandering the streets of Baton Rouge with the other undead. They agree to search for him, limiting their pursuit to the start of hurricane season, about a week from when the novel begins. Vermalion's partner, Rachel, fears that Mazok wants to kill his father when they find him, and as such, the hunt for Mr. Mazok puts a strain on Vermalion and Rachel's relationship. Part of what separates A Questionable Shape from the average zombie narrative is its interest in exploring the nature of undeath and avoiding the cliches of the genre. Zombie media is often about the cruelty of man and the breakdown of society, the end of the world. Vermalion does fear that this is the apocalypse, and that one day he may grub among garbage bins behind abandoned grocery stores, defending himself from nomadic, malnourished, and desperate humans as much as from the undead. But this is not framed as an inevitable outcome of the zombie epidemic, but rather a terrified thought spiral of a mind suffering from PTSD and catastrophizing. The world, despite suffering, did not end. In A Questionable Shape, life mostly goes on the same as before, despite all the death and undeath. Sure, there was a time when everyone was hiding inside with their windows boarded up and their doors barricaded, but that time is coming to an end now. Baton Rouge is opening back up again. Despite this, Vermalion understands the epidemic isn't over for good. He would have to come to terms with what is happening, because in all likelihood, it will go on happening, for months, maybe years. I first read this novel during the COVID-19 pandemic. I felt two ways about it at the time. What AQS gets right about the contagion experience is how it affects you, in your mind, forever. There is always a part of me now, alert to the diseases of others, alert to the diseases of myself. I have a great fear, still, of being infected, of infecting others. But life goes on. I have to make money, so it's time to head out and work a service industry job. And enough time has passed that we all know what risks are worth taking and what aren't. The world has opened back up again. The danger isn't gone, but it is less than what it was. What the novel gets wrong about an infectious disease outbreak is the American government's preparedness and response capabilities. It envisions a world in which everything that could go right from a disease prevention perspective does, more or less, go right. Despite this failure to match reality, in some ways it was a comforting fantasy when I first read it. A fantasy where the Louisiana CDC, Baton Rouge PD, and FEMA work together to adequately protect the American people. They are even gentle with the zombies, catching them and storing them on barges and in quarantine zones, going as far as allowing friends and relatives to visit them. To me, it was reassuring and calming to read about an epidemic where everything kind of works out. People died, were infected, yes, but at the start of the novel, the outbreak is coming back under control again. Maybe this was possible in my life too. Maybe the pandemic would end. There are passages of pure beauty in AQS. Vermalion describes a moment spent with Rachel by a waterfall, a sun-drunk memory where the sun's rays writhe lambent in the water and over the skin of Rachel's palms, wriggling white oblongs like larvae of light. I love the repetition of L's in this sequence. Lambent, wriggling, oblongs, like larvae of light. A zombie's moan is dark and compact as garden dirt, triggering some toxin of the earth. Garden dirt calls to mind something nostalgic, a childhood memory of palming the earth, feeling it fall between your fingers, wet and dark. But at the end of the sentence, you run into the word toxin, an archaic word for an alarm sounded by a bell. It intrudes into the sentence, and while it's a strange word, it is a welcome one that fits exactly as it should. This recurs in Sim's writing. He clearly has a love for words that are underutilized or archaic, words with very particular meanings that he often uses for metaphoric purposes. When he first sees an undead man up close, Vermilion feels something like the awe that the visitant must feel in the presence of the archangel or the alien. In the novel, the zombie is not just a mindless antagonist. It is not something to be killed, but something to be studied, to be viewed not with antipathy, but with curiosity. In one of the novel's most unsettling moments, Mazok reveals that he believes all zombies should be killed, with the possible, though never stated, exception of his father. This is treated by Rachel as something horrific, something unthinkably cruel. With all zombie media, always on my mind is that there is no disease that works like zombieism. Nothing that makes someone into a rabid killer. There's exceptions within the animal kingdom, rabies, cordyceps, but nothing that makes human beings into monsters we need to put down. So why does so much media fantasize about this? I don't know. The hero of A Questionable Shape is not a killer or survivalist. All our characters are ordinary people, just trying to live after a severe epidemic. In a sense, it demystifies all the apocalyptic fantasy usually contained within the zombie story. There is a stasis to almost all of Bennett Sims' writing. He is interested not in action, but in reaction, and a mind at work. In Destroy All Monsters, from his short story collection, White Dialogues, the unnamed narrator watches as a gecko feeds on dust mites and makes its way across his window to possibly eat a moth. The narrator reflects on his youth, watching Godzilla vs. Mothra. In Minds of Winter, the narrator reflects on a snowflake's anthropomorphized movements across, again, his window. These stories are the exception to Bennett Sims' writing, because they are not paranoid horror stories, but nostalgic recollections. But all his stories, even the scary ones, reveal Sims' adoration of language and its flexibility, and his vast breadth of knowledge. Godzilla's eyes are vitreous and clear, narrowed beneath his hackett-shaped unibrow. Dust moths evade death in a Stygian stigmergy. The narrator's condition while witnessing the spectacle is hypnagogic and groggy. These words, vitreous, hackett-shaped, stigmergy, hypnagogic, are rare and refined, fitted just to their purpose. This is true of all Sims' words and all his stories. But this isn't to say his writing is nothing but roses and plums. His characters have complex vocabularies with the ability to discuss history, philosophy, and literature, but, importantly, this will not save them. They are well-read people who are unable to read. In A Questionable Shape, Vermilion blames the epidemic of undeath for his bibliophobia. He wants to read, but the epidemic has made him spiral into doubt. How can he imagine a future after the zombie apocalypse? Nothing that I read helps me understand the undead, he claims. Philosophy, which was supposed to teach me how to die, to prepare me for death, has left me utterly unprepared to meet undeath. He claims this, but the past 159 pages have been an attempt to describe undeath using movies, books, and video games as metaphors. But he isn't wrong. His analysis cannot actually capture the feeling of being undead. Undeath is as utterly unknowable as, if apart from, death. But it's the Lovecraft problem of trying to describe the indescribable. We can't use words to say what Cthulhu looks like, but this is a text medium, so the best we can do is use words to describe Cthulhu. In Portonacio Sarcophagus, the narrator starts off describing an intricately designed sarcophagus on display in the Palazzo Massimo Museum in Rome. Eventually he comes to notice that the faces of the interned are missing from the display. This leads him to consider the nature of facelessness, of memory loss, and eventually death. Sims is trying to use language to describe the unseen and unseeing. He's trying to do the impossible, and that's really something to see. The problem of reading and writing comes up again in Introduction to the Reading of Hegel, from Other Minds and Other Stories, which opens with the line, "That night the reader couldn't read," and in Unknown, his mind preoccupied by fears and uncertainties, the protagonist reaches for his book, pretending to read. Other Minds is about the protagonist's troubled reading, as he reads on an e-reader and sees that other readers have highlighted only passages about love, which the protagonist himself would never highlight, and other minds have neglected passages he loves. His reading is disturbed. Likewise, the writer in Radical Closure, you, has your writing disrupted by thoughts of self-hatred that dog you wherever you go. This recurring problem is ironic, given that the stories themselves draw on such a deep pool of intellectual reference and a love of literary devices and language. But maybe this is Sim's way of excusing such a deep pool of reference, that his characters cannot be untroubled by their intellect. For many of them, especially the academics in Introduction to the Reading of Hegel and White Dialogues, their smarts are the source of their pain. So Sim's stories can be broken down into a few different categories. There is the nostalgia-warmed Language as Delectable Dessert Meditations, City of Wolfmen, Destroy All Monsters, The New Violence, Minds of Winter, and there's the straight-up horror stories like Ekphrasis, The Postcard, and A Nightmare. But the majority of his stories, more or less, all the others not named here, included in his two collections, are about the mental breakdown of his narrators as they encounter an unknowable world that all their experience has not prepared them to properly understand. The Bennett Sims story I normally give people when I want them to share my enthusiasm for him is The Bookcase from White Dialogues, in which a man fights his landlady over a bookcase, the story being told through the framework of an episode of This American Life. I use it as an introduction because it is Sim's most accessible story. His writing isn't melodramatic, and there's not a lot of obvious emotional hooks to it, with the exception of The Bookcase, which has a real dramatic punch in the end. I'd say Sim's writing can seem a little detached, overly analytical. While this isn't a problem for me, or for anyone who likes more experimental fiction, it might be a bit much for some readers. If you want a taste of Sims before spending any money, you can read one of the best sequences from AQS on Electric Literature's website. I'll include a link in the description. Hope you check him out, and see you next time.